Arthur's Family Truth. The moment my son-in-law slid a nursing home brochure across the dinner table, I already had the voice recorder running. He placed it beside my plate himself, set it down with a small deliberate sound, and folded his hands. His expression was arranged into something that was meant to look like concern. His father sat to his left. His mother had positioned herself at the corner where she could watch my face when I picked it up. Next to the brochure, a power of attorney form, a property transfer agreement, a consent form for a guardianship review. I read through the brochure without hurrying. Nobody spoke. Then I looked at Reginald. "You mean the access road," I said. He didn't answer right away. That half-second of silence told me everything I needed to know about how prepared he actually was. 4 days earlier, I had been sitting in a low chair on the 22nd floor of the Osworth construction tower while my son-in-law took a phone call in the hallway. He had asked me to wait, which I did. His office was the kind of space designed to establish hierarchy before anyone said a word. Glass walls, city view in every direction, a desk that had cost more than most cars. The chair he had directed me to sat low, which put my knees slightly above my hips and his desk well above my eye line when I was seated. I had noticed that. His laptop was open on the side table by the window. The screen was still lit. I leaned forward from the low chair and read what was on it without getting up. An email thread. Subject line Riverside Legacy. Final barrier. The project manager had written, the Whitfield parcel was the only remaining obstacle. The access road to the northern section of the development ran directly through that property. Without it, the entire northern section was landlocked. The Tokyo investors would not commit. A resolution was needed before end of quarter. Reginald's reply was 2 lines. Work every angle. Offers, pressure, whatever it takes. That property does not leave the table. I took out my phone. The old one, cracked corner, photographed the screen, slid it back into my jacket pocket. Then I folded my hands in my lap and waited. When Reginald came back in, he looked satisfied, the way men do when they believe a call has gone their way. I told him the view from up here was something. He agreed. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing particular. He said he wanted to make sure I was doing all right out there on my own. Said Nadine worried about me. Said if I ever needed anything, I shouldn't hesitate. I said I appreciated that. I drove home and called Clifford Hartley before I even got out of the truck. My name is Leonard Whitfield. I'm 67 years old, retired civil engineer, widower. For the past 6 years, I have lived alone in a small house on a half-acre lot along the South Fork River, outside Chicago. If you had seen me on that Tuesday afternoon, worn brown jacket, 10-year-old pickup, the kind of face that does not tend to register in rooms designed to remind you of your place, you would have seen exactly what Reginald Osworth saw. A quiet old man with calloused hands who had married his daughter and had no particular standing anywhere that mattered. What Reginald never thought to look for was the fact that I had been the majority shareholder of his family's company for 30 years. In 1994, Howard Dunmore, Reginald's father, had built Osworth Construction on 2 city contracts and a considerable amount of confidence. By the time Reginald was finishing middle school, the company had expanded into commercial development, industrial builds, and infrastructure projects across the Midwest. It looked from the outside like a straightforward success story. From the inside, it was something more complicated. A land acquisition deal in Ohio had gone wrong. Howard had over-leveraged. The deal collapsed, and it took a large portion of the company's reserves with it on the way down. Osworth Construction was roughly 3 weeks from filing for bankruptcy. Howard needed a silent partner, not a board member, not a named investor. Someone with capital who would give him the runway he needed, let him stabilize the business, and let him keep his name on the building without anyone outside the agreement knowing the terms. My engineering firm had done well over 20 years. Margaret and I had been careful. We had built up enough that we could put in $280 million for a 51% controlling stake without destroying ourselves financially. It was most of what we had. We believed in the fundamentals of the business, and we believed Howard could turn it around if someone gave him time. We drew up the agreement through Clifford Hartley, my attorney of 22 years, and we kept it quiet. Howard knew, his lawyers knew, Clifford knew. The stake was held under LW Capital, Leonard and Margaret. No one else was told because no one else needed to know. Over the 30 years that followed, the company grew. Chicago kept building. Osworth Construction landed contracts for commercial towers, waterfront redevelopments, infrastructure projects that ran across 3 states. The $280 million Margaret and I had put in during 1994 was worth just over $5 billion by the time Reginald was appointed Chief Executive Officer 4 years ago. He had been running the company for 4 years without once asking who LW Capital was. A majority shareholder had been sitting in the ownership structure of his family's business for 3 decades, and the man at the top of that business had never looked closely enough at his own company's paperwork to notice. I mention this not to make a particular point about his abilities. I mention it because it tells you something about how Reginald understood the world. He was skilled at reading rooms for what he expected to find in them, and in any room I was in, he expected to find exactly what he saw. A quiet old man who drove an old truck, lived on a modest property along a river, and had nothing that mattered. That made everything that followed considerably simpler. Clifford Hartley had handled my affairs for 22 years. He was 60 years old, steady, methodical in everything he did, and he had a gift for preparation that I had come to rely on the way you rely on a well-built structure. He handled everything from Margaret's estate to the annual shareholder filings for LW Capital that nobody at Osworth Construction had ever seemed curious enough to trace. When I called him from the truck that Tuesday evening, he listened without interrupting. When I finished, I said, "Pull Clause 17. Clause 17 of the LW Capital shareholder agreement gave the majority shareholder the right to trigger an emergency board review and immediate executive suspension in the event of conduct meeting the threshold for breach of fiduciary duty or criminal conspiracy." What I had read on that screen, a chief executive directing company resources toward a personal acquisition scheme that used his executive position as leverage against a family member, met that threshold. Clifford confirmed it Thursday night when he sent over the full legal analysis. The conduct at the dinner table, if the evening went the way I expected it to, would add elder financial abuse, a Class 2 felony under Illinois statute. Termination documentation for the CEO, I said. Full asset freeze, emergency board meeting. Everything drafted and on your desk by Thursday night. Already know what's needed, Clifford said. Anything else? Find out who on the board has been unhappy with Reginald's leadership over the past 4 years. I want allies in that room before I walk in. He said he would make calls. The land along the South Fork was Margaret's the way a thing belongs to a person when they have earned it with their own time and put their own hands into it. She had walked every available lot in a 3-county area over 8 months before she settled on that property. She said it was the right one because you could hear the river from the kitchen window. She bought it with money she had saved working double shifts at a textile plant while I was building the engineering firm. We put the house up together over 2 summers, on weekends, working beside each other the way we had worked at everything for 32 years. Every board in that house has her hands on it somewhere. She planted 12 trees along the east fence line, 1 per year for the first 12 years. The last one she planted herself in October 2 years before she died, and it was the tallest one in the row by the time Reginald's project manager wrote the words "only remaining obstacle" in a business email on a Tuesday afternoon. Neither one of them had ever stood on that lot at 6 in the morning and watched the fog come off the water. Neither one of them had any vocabulary for what it is when a person earns a piece of ground over time, puts their own work into it, and builds something that carries the weight of the years. To them, it was a transaction that had not yet been completed, a line item with an access problem. That was the extent of what they needed it to be. Wednesday, I split firewood in the back of the house for an hour, made a sandwich, and sat at the kitchen table watching the river. In the evening, I went through files in the back room, old ones, from the early years of the firm when Margaret and I were working out of a converted garage and taking whatever contracts we could get. There's a photograph in one of those folders. The 2 of us standing in front of our first completed project, a small pedestrian bridge over a drainage canal in Cicero. She is laughing at something I said. I don't remember what. I have looked at that photograph more times than I can count, and I still cannot remember what I said. But I remember exactly how she looked at every project we finished together. Like she was personally proud of every rivet in it. Thursday night, I sat at the old desk in the back room and read through the shareholder documents, the original agreement from 1994, the amendment filings from 2003 and 2011, Clause 17, line by line, the way I have always read contracts, not skipping anything, not assuming I know what comes next. Then I turned on the voice recorder on my phone and spoke into it clearly and slowly. What I had seen in Reginald's office on Tuesday, the email subject line. The exact text of the project manager's message. The exact text of Reginald's reply. I wanted a dated record in my own voice before anything became complicated. I turned the recorder off and went to bed. Nadine called Friday morning. I was out at the back of the house checking the rain gauge. Her voice had that quality she gets when she has rehearsed what she is going to say but has not fully committed to believing it. She told me Reginald's parents were in town for the weekend and that everyone thought it would be good to sit down together as a family. Said she had been meaning to do this for a while. Said it would be good for all of them and for me. What time, I asked. 7, she said, and then after a pause, maybe wear something nice. She said it the way people say things when they are embarrassed to be saying them. Don't worry about it, I told her. After we hung up, I stood in the backyard with the phone in my hand. The river was up a little from the rain earlier in the week. A heron was working the shallows about 50 yards downstream. I watched it for a few minutes. I had known this dinner was coming since Tuesday. I had spent 4 days getting every piece of paper in order. Every recording time-stamped, every legal instrument drafted and ready. At 40, I might have been angry in a way that made noise. At 67, you have seen enough to understand that anger is only useful when you have somewhere to point it. I put on the brown jacket, the worn one, the one Nadine always winced at when she saw me in it, and called a cab. I wanted to arrive looking exactly like what Reginald expected me to be. The cab dropped me at the Winnetka address at 5 minutes to 7. The house was lit from every window, the kind of place that looks like a catalog photograph from the outside. Stone driveway, hedges trimmed to a precise shape, a front door that had probably cost more than my first car. I checked that the voice recorder on my phone was running. It was. Gloria Dunmore opened the door before I could knock. She was 68 years old and had spent most of those years perfecting the particular social art of making guests feel exactly as welcome as it was useful to make them feel. She looked me over from the jacket down to the shoes and took her time about it. Then she produced a smile that had clearly cost her something. Leonard, you found it all right. I told her I had no trouble. The living room was designed to remind you that you were a guest in someone else's world. White and chrome and glass. Nadine was near the fireplace with a wine glass she was not drinking from, turning it by the stem. She looked up when I came in. The expression on her face was difficult to read, something between relief and a kind of quiet dread. The face of a person who is committed to a course of action and has recently stopped being sure it was a good one. Howard Dunmore was already seated. 74 years old, thick white mustache, the posture of a man who had spent decades expecting rooms to organize themselves around him. He stood when I walked in and shook my hand firmly. I said the same things back. Reginald came in from the back hallway a moment later. Jacket on, phone in hand, the version of himself he assembled for rooms where impressions mattered. He clapped me on the shoulder like we were old friends. Said he was glad I could make it, asked if I wanted a drink. I said water was fine. Dinner was served at a long table set for 5. The food was good. Gloria had arranged caterers, roast salmon, a grain salad, good bread. The conversation ran on safe ground for the first 40 minutes. The weather, Howard's recent golf trip to Scottsdale, a charity event Gloria had chaired in October. Reginald asked how the house was holding up. I said it was solid, built to last. He smiled. He didn't know I meant something by it. Nadine barely spoke. She refilled her wine twice and kept her eyes on the tablecloth. Once during a pause in conversation, she looked over at me and I saw something move across her face. Close to an apology, close enough that I could read what it was, but she looked away before it could form into anything she had to own. After the plates were cleared, Reginald reached under his chair. He placed a manila envelope on the table beside my plate. Next to it, Gloria set down the Oak Ridge brochure, placing it with the same small deliberate sound from earlier. I picked it up and read through it without hurrying. Nobody spoke while I did. I set it down. You mean the access road, I said. Reginald's expression didn't change immediately. I'm sorry. The Riverside Legacy Project. My property sits directly on the only viable access route to the northern section of the development. That's what this dinner is. Howard cleared his throat. Gloria's hand went still around her wine glass. Reginald's practiced expression held for a few seconds longer, and then something shifted behind it. He leaned forward with his hands flat on the table, the presentation posture, the face of a man delivering difficult news for someone else's benefit. Leonard, we've been concerned about your situation for a while now. Living alone out there, maintaining that property on a fixed income. It's a lot for one person. Frankly, It's become a concern for the family, and we think it might be time to consider something more manageable. Margaret bought that land, I said. She worked nights for 3 years to afford it. She planted 12 trees along the east fence line, 1 per year. I'm not sure that qualifies as a maintenance concern so much as a life. Reginald opened the envelope and spread the documents across the table. Power of attorney, property transfer, the guardianship consent form. These are straightforward. You sign the power of attorney, we handle the sale, you transition to Oak Ridge. It's a good facility. Your own room, medical staff on site, meals taken care of. I looked down the table at Nadine. She was staring at her hands. Her jaw was tight. Is this what you want? I asked her. Outside, a car passed on the street. The refrigerator hummed somewhere in the kitchen. Nadine picked up her wine glass and took a long sip and did not answer. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and took out my phone. Reginald laughed. Short, dismissive, the kind of laugh that is designed to make a person feel small. Calling a cab, my own voice came out of the speaker first, calm and level, reading the email subject line aloud. Riverside Legacy, final barrier. Then the project manager's message filled the dining room. The Whitfield parcel is the only remaining obstacle. The access road to the northern section runs directly through that property. Without it, the entire northern section is landlocked. The Tokyo investors will not commit. Then Reginald's reply. Work every angle. Offers, pressure, whatever it takes. That property does not leave the table. I stopped it. Nobody at the table moved. Then I scrolled to the recording I had started when I walked through the front door and let 10 seconds of it play. Reginald's voice, smooth and reasonable, laying out the terms of the power of attorney transfer, then Howard's voice. Sometimes personal attachments have to give way to larger realities. Then the quiet sound of the Oak Ridge brochure being placed on the table. I stopped it and set the phone face up between the documents and the brochure. I've been recording since I walked in, I said. Everything said at this table tonight is documented. Clifford Hartley has copies of both files as of 10 minutes ago. Reginald stood up. His chair scraped back hard against the floor. That recording is inadmissible. Illinois is a 2-party consent state. You cannot use that. Illinois requires consent from all parties for private conversations, I said. A dinner table with 5 people present is not a private conversation under the statute. Clifford already confirmed it. But even if it were, what is on that recording is sufficient probable cause for a criminal investigation into elder financial abuse, which is a Class 2 felony in this state. You're welcome to argue the admissibility question with a judge. He looked at me. Then he said, sign the papers, Leonard. This doesn't have to go any further. I'm not signing anything tonight, I said, but I'm making a phone call. I dialed Clifford and put it on speaker. He answered on the first ring. Cliff, activate Clause 17 of the LW Capital Shareholder Agreement. Freeze all Osworth construction assets pending emergency board review. Prepare termination documentation for the Chief Executive Officer. Effective immediately. Clifford's voice was the same as it always was. The voice of a man who had already prepared for the call he was receiving. Already drafted and ready to file. Board meeting confirmed for tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Lorraine Hollis and Philip Brannigan have both confirmed. Full board will be present. Thank you, Cliff. Anything else tonight? I looked across the table at Reginald, who was standing with one hand on the back of his chair and not quite finding his footing. No, I said. I think we're done here. I ended the call. Howard made a sound low in his throat. He said it almost to himself. LW Capital. And then he looked at me, really looked. Not the way he had been looking all evening, but the way a person looks when a thing they have not understood suddenly resolves. I saw the exact moment it landed. You put in $280 million in 1994, I said. I gave you that runway. I gave you 30 years of silent partnership and never asked for a seat at your table or credit for a single contract built on it. That stake is worth $5 billion today, and you spent 6 years of Sunday dinners and one Friday night trying to take my wife's land so your son could build a glass tower on it. Howard didn't answer. He looked older than 74 right then. Reginald found his voice again. Less behind it now. I'll fight this. Wrongful termination. Shareholder overreach. I'll have lawyers on this by morning. You're welcome to, I said. You'll be funding that lawsuit from personal assets. Since the corporate accounts are frozen as of tonight, Clifford has already contacted the board members. The vote tomorrow is a formality. I pushed back my chair and stood up. Nadine had not moved since I started the recording. Her wine glass was empty. She was looking at the tablecloth. I stopped beside her chair on my way out. "I'm not angry with you," I said quietly. "But I need you to understand what happened here tonight, and I need you to think about it on your own." Without him in the room, she did not look up, but she nodded barely, almost nothing, and I saw her jaw tighten the way it used to when she was small and trying not to let something show. I said good night to the room. Nobody answered. The cab I had arranged in advance was waiting at the end of the driveway. I got in, gave the driver my address, and watched the house get smaller through the rear window until we turned onto the main road and it was gone. I was home by 9:30. I made a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table and listened to the river for a while. The board meeting the next morning took less than an hour. I wore my dark suit, the only one I owned, bought for Margaret's funeral and worn twice since. Clifford met me in the lobby of the Osworth construction tower at 8:45 with 2 briefcases and the expression of a man who has prepared thoroughly and is not worried about the outcome. The boardroom seated 12 floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, a rosewood table that had seen 30 years of the company's decisions made across it. Lorraine Hollis was already there when we arrived, along with Philip Brannigan and 5 other board members. They stood when I walked in, not out of ceremony, out of something closer to relief. Lorraine had been a board member for 11 years and had watched Reginald's 4-year tenure with increasing concern. She had called me the previous night after Clifford briefed her. The first thing she said was that she was glad someone had finally done something. Philip Brannigan said roughly the same thing in fewer words. Reginald arrived at 9 o'clock with Howard beside him and a lawyer I didn't recognize trailing behind. He had made an effort with his appearance, but his eyes were tired and there was a tightness around his jaw that no amount of preparation smooths over. Howard walked slowly. He had the look of a man carrying something he had not figured out how to set down. Clifford presented the case in order. The email thread from Tuesday, the dinner recording, the legal analysis establishing that the conduct at the table Friday night met the threshold for elder financial abuse under Illinois statute. The documentation showing Reginald had directed company resources toward a personal acquisition scheme that used his executive position as direct leverage against a family member. Each board member had a printed copy in front of them. The room was quiet while Clifford spoke. Nobody interrupted. When he finished, Lorraine Hollis looked down the length of the table at Reginald. "Do you have anything to say before we vote?" Reginald's lawyer leaned over and spoke in his ear. Reginald shook his head once and said nothing. Lorraine moved for immediate termination of Reginald Osworth as Chief Executive Officer of Osworth Construction. Philip seconded. The vote was 8-0. Howard abstained. His board advisor position was terminated by separate motion, also unanimous. Reginald sat without moving for a moment after the vote. Then he looked at me from the far end of the table. "I built that company," he said. 4 years, I built it. Your father built it," I said. "You ran it." There's a difference. He did not have an answer for that. Security came at 9:47 and walked Reginald and Howard to the elevator. The doors closed. The boardroom went quiet. Lorraine Hollis was named interim CEO that same morning. Her first decision was to commission a redesign of the Riverside Legacy Access Plan. 3 months later, the revised proposal routed the entrance road along the northern boundary of the property rather than through it. The development broke ground in the spring, on schedule. The land along the South Fork stayed exactly as it was. In March, the city approved a proposal to establish a public walking path along the river frontage. They named it the Margaret Whitfield Riverside Trail. I found out by letter. I read it twice, set it on the kitchen table, and went outside to stand on the back step for a while. I did not have much to say about it. It seemed right. It seemed like something she would have valued more than I could put into words, and I didn't try. Nadine knocked on my door on a Saturday morning in April. No call ahead. She was wearing a plain cotton jacket, and her hair was pulled back without any particular care. She looked like someone who had not been sleeping well for some time. She said she was sorry, not for leaving Reginald, which she was clear about. She said that was the right decision and she had made it herself. She was sorry for Friday night, for sitting at that table and not answering when I asked her directly. I told her I understood why she hadn't. Fear is a reasonable response to a situation like that. It doesn't make it right, but it makes it human. We sat on the back porch with coffee and talked for 2 hours. About Margaret, mostly. about the early years when the three of us would drive out on weekends and work on the house together. Nadine handing nails up to me while I worked on the roof framing. Margaret marking measurements on boards with a carpenter's pencil she kept behind her ear, checking every line twice before she made a cut. Nadine said she hadn't thought about those years in a long time. I told her I thought about them most mornings. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't hint at her circumstances or make any reference to money. She sat with her coffee and looked at the river. At one point she said, "Mom really did pick the best spot." I said she really did. Some men spend their whole lives making noise about what they own. Margaret and I decided early on that what we had built was ours, and that the people who needed to know would know when the time came. That time came on a Friday night in November. It went the way it was always going to go. You don't have to announce what you're worth. You just have to be ready when someone makes the mistake of assuming you're worth nothing at all.